Hello, this is Kenneth Nichols for Great Writer Steel. Today, we have a great interview with a great writer, Christy Crutchfield, author of the publishing genius book, How to Catch a Coyote. It's a wonderful novel told in stories about a family. We can all relate to that, most of us. She's going to tell us all about how she came to compose the book, how she put the book together. She's going to give us some insight into why she changed points of view for each of the characters, how she decided which of the moments in the characters' lives to feature, and she's going to give us a look into her writing and submission process, something that all writers should talk about a little bit more. So sit back and enjoy, relax. I'm going to give you that interview right after I say a few words about family. It's the holiday season as I record this. Most people are thinking about sleigh rides, lights on the lake, doing things with family. At least that's the people who have families. And of course, family is an extremely common theme in literary works. Charles Dickens, all kinds of people. Stephen King, those are families. But when I read How to Catch a Coyote, I was thinking about John Irving. Now, of course, Miss Crutchfield does not include bears and wrestling and Exeter in her book, but the two have a thematic similarity in that the characters all have their own problems, and they all stem from certain places in their growing up. I love the multi-generational nature of the work, How to Catch a Coyote, that is also reminiscent of a John Irving work. So I think it's important to kind of contemplate why family is such a big topic. Yes, first of all, family is from whence we all spring. By definition, we all come from some kind of family. We also seek to create families around ourselves. Whether or not we're related to them by blood, we all group around people who have similar ideas, similar hopes, similar history. Whatever it is, we create a family. There's also a continuity in family. We share a common bond because of all of the history that we've shared with them. Families all have their own unique ways of doing things, cooking. Every family has their own strange recipe that other people think is weird, but it's really not. And most of all, family is a touchstone to which we can all return, no matter where we are in our lives, whenever we need help. The trick, I suppose, is figuring out how to create a new story out of something that's been done so many times, these family stories. Mr. Irving does it through the use of very interesting and specific detail. I love the way that Miss Crutchfield allows each member of the family to star at some point and gives them the benefit of the doubt no matter their sins. I think the big lesson we can learn about writing about family is that we need to figure out a way to make the extremely commonplace special in some way. Everybody, like I said, has a family, but how do you make the family you're writing about special? How do you get people to care about this specific family that's in some way unlike all others? And as you'll see from my interview with Miss Crutchfield, she manages to do just that. Let's take a listen. Hello, we are here with Christy Crutchfield, author of the publishing genius book, How to Catch a Coyote. Hello, Christy.
Hello.
Hello. First of all, I have to say that I really enjoyed the book a lot. It is a collection of short stories that are all linked. They tell the story of a family spanning from the 70s to nearly the present day. Can you talk a little bit about how the book came about?
Sure. And first of all, thank you very much. Thanks for having me, and thanks for reading my book. Yeah, it actually started as a short story a very, very long time ago. And then I really wanted to return to the characters. And, the actual short story never showed up in the book. But, it started from the perspective of Daniel, who is the character we return to the most in the book. It was from his perspective as a very young kid trying to figure out what's going on in his family. And then, maybe 3 years later, I found myself writing from the points of view of the characters again. And so I decided it was something I really wanted to pursue.
Very cool. Yeah, we noticed the first chapter in the book is how to write a family history. Daniel's in college, and he's asked to do a little bit of anthropology, I suppose, about his own life. And I thought that was a good way to introduce everybody. and to kind of inform the reader what the direction of the piece was. You also frame the work with a lot of pieces from the Encyclopedia of Coyotes. Can you talk about how you decided what kind of pieces you would write as the interstitial entries in this encyclopedia?
Sure. Yeah. Well, the family history introduction was probably one of the last things I added. And as far as the coyote pieces, I was doing a lot of research into coyotes as I was writing this book, and I was finding all these just amazing things that I didn't even mean to have sort of these parallels to some of the family members. And for me, some of the chapters were, a little intense, right? And so I think it was important sometimes to have these markers as a way to not just break up that voice or that intensity, but also to help settle in and then move to, a switch to another character at other times. So sometimes it helped to break that up. And then a lot of times those particular pieces felt like they were representative of the next chapter that we would read.
Right. In terms of the structure of the book, I love the way that, I'm guessing you did it on purpose, you put a lot of exposition into that first chapter. Not only did you have the conceit of having Daniel be assigned to write a paper about his family, but you also managed to have the narrator kind of slip in a chronology. Was this a conscious choice? How did you decide how you would introduce everybody?
Mm-hmm. Well, as I was writing it, so this was actually my thesis for grad school, and I was piecing all these different things from, out of, from a different timeline. It's not in order. And I had a suggestion from Chris Batchelder, who is my advisor at the time, that I needed something to give the reader some kind of grounding early on. And so as I was thinking about that, I thought it needed to come from Daniel. And, I still wanted it to be something that would feel like would happen in the plot of the story. And so it's actually something that he's fighting against doing. He doesn't really want to write this, and half of the things on there are the things he doesn't actually write down. And so, a big part of the book was not really to reveal what happens at the very end, but I wanted that to be up front as well, so that you can see how the different characters interpret it, and then really decide sort of which sides you take in some ways. And so I didn't want the situation to be a surprise as much as how everyone dealt with it in the end. And so I thought that would really lay out all the pieces, but also show what Daniel is conflicted with and that he's really dealing with throughout the whole book, and to show some of that confliction and what he actually in the end is willing to say and what he's not willing to say in a public space.
Yeah, no, I definitely noticed that the sections got more intense as the book goes along, especially in terms of what the characters are dealing with. A lot of the bigger conflicts are dealt with toward the end, which obviously makes sense. So another thing that you did that I really enjoyed and wanted to know more about, each of the chapters is told from a different family member's perspective, and I've been dying to ask you about it. Why are the mother sections in second person?
At first they just started coming a little bit naturally in second person as I was writing them, but I think the reason that happened, Marianne was probably my hardest character to figure out, and part of that is because of the choices that she makes. And so she is someone who, in a lot of ways, is trying to do the right thing, and in a lot of ways doesn't do the right thing, makes a lot of poor choices, but she suddenly is filling this role of not just mother, but now provider, and this one that has to make all the decisions when the questions come. And so it became more like she's just getting through, and she's got to instruct herself and give herself these instructions, and very much be stuck in her own head as she's moving through the world. And in certain ways, she's a really disconnected character, so it felt like the right point of view for her.
I find that interesting in light of what I found with the father sections. When you write about Hill, I found that the narration was a lot more poetic, the diction a little bit higher, a lot prettier. Was that a conscious choice? Is that something that you agree with, or not?
I mean, I know definitely Marianne, I think of her as a harsh character, and in the way that she speaks when we see her in dialogue, is pretty blunt. So I think some of it could have come from there. I guess I wasn't ever thinking of pretty as something in my writing, but I think I was interested in the way that Hill sees the world, and into the details that are going to come into focus. So maybe that's where some of the poeticness comes from.
Yeah, it's definitely a compliment. I was a little curious as to why some of the sections seemed a little bit to have that prettier language. And you mentioned that Marianne the mother was the hardest one to write. So Hill the father was a little bit easier for you?
Well, I mean, I definitely still struggled with Hill because he, in the end, he is sort of the monster of the book. But something I'm really interested in as a writer is getting into the heads of the people that I wouldn't necessarily want to see in real life or like have dinner with in real life, but to kind of try to understand people in certain ways. And so I guess I don't know if that just in some way trying to understand him came a little more naturally at first, or if part of it was the fact that what I'm trying to show is more of his human side, or more of the ways that he can be believable as a good guy or a good father. And so, yeah, I don't know. He just he came much more naturally to me in some ways, which maybe should scare me a little, but
no, we're writers. That's what we do.
Right.
In light of what you're saying, I find it interesting that you're absolutely right that we should look at our characters, even if we don't like them personally. We should give them complete lives. What I really liked is the chapter A List of Fears, which is from Hill's perspective. What I liked was you gave us the necessary exposition in terms of what happened after Marianne became pregnant. I kind of like the honesty in the way that I'm assuming that men feel when they unexpectedly help to create a child. The deliberation as to what would happen, trying to understand the new life ahead. How did you kind of work your understanding of the character into kind of presenting a fair look at him?
So I guess by what I think of when any character I'm writing is just to make them as human as possible, which means all the flaws need to be there, but there's something redeemable in there as well. And so I guess for me, what I try to do is it's almost like being an actor in certain ways, just I put myself in the role and think about what thoughts might naturally come from these different feelings. And if I were 20 years old and in college and just getting started, and this sort of wrench came in, but also doing what I'm supposed to do, and what questions that I might wrestle with. I think that's where a lot of it comes from, is just honestly thinking about what he really feels and then what he's going to say. And so to balance those two things out. And I think that's where third person was helpful. Because that way I can still get really close, but I can also report some things that maybe he wouldn't have said if this were shifting in first person.
And it's a little more honest, too. Very cool. So how did you decide which slivers of life from each of the characters that you would include?
Oh, man. It was a lot of trial and error. There's a lot I threw out from this book. And it really became, a lot of it was guided by Daniel. So a lot of where the story went plot-wise really came from the Daniel sections. And then, I really wanted to think about how we could better understand how each character understood the situation, understood Dakota. And so I think they came more from those places where they're either challenged or they are naturally remembering that challenge, because a lot of it is them stuck in their heads and still mulling things over. And I I think from the very beginning, I knew I didn't want to have anything from Dakota's point of view, since she's what gets everything started, and it's everyone thinking about her and the choices they've made because of her and around her, and so I really didn't want to hear from her because of that, and so it seems like she's still this missing character and this very present character at the same time.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I found all the characters compelling, but Dakota seemed like more of an interesting mystery, somebody I wanted to kind of decode, because she has trouble as an adolescent, most of it fairly normal. We see her with boyfriends, we see her with a teacher who becomes something more than a teacher. So yeah, I really like that you're taking a look, a scance at her. I hadn't thought of a question about that, but I love what you said. So Dakota's kind of while Daniel's the plot driver, Dakota's kind of the establishment of tone in your view?
I don't know if I thought of it that way, but that's a really interesting way to think about it, because the tone comes from the different ways each character sees her, because she is present in almost virtually every chapter, but in like a force of anger for Marianne, and then in a force of sort of longing for Daniel, and then in all kinds of confusing ways for Hill, and then similarly we have a couple other characters who are not in the family, which is another way to see her working. So I guess, I don't know if I thought of her as tone, but she's the motivation, I guess, for everything that happens.
Yeah, that's definitely a very interesting way to look at it. I guess I'm a big fan of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. I don't know if you know the show, but I guess
I've seen a couple episodes.
Yeah, I love it. I guess it seems like Dakota's kind of the wild card, as Charlie might say. She kind of stirs the pot and advances things a little bit. Very cool.
In a lot of ways, she wants to stir the pot. She's a very manipulative character, and so, it's. For everything that we sort of feel for her, there's also a moment that, we don't trust her, and we, can be a little bit afraid of what she's going to do next when she comes into the story.
Very cool. I was very curious about, when I get the books, I like to write in them and jot down notes and do what I can to really understand the book. And so I ended up writing down the dates for each essay. Each essay is dated, which helps the reader with chronology. Right. But I found it curious, why didn't you or your editors put the dates of each story into the table of contents?
Oh, you'll probably have to ask Adam that.
Well, I don't know if it was your choice or their. I found it.
The table of contents. I'm trying to remember if I had the dates in there originally when I sent the manuscript out. And some of it may have just been as simple as space saving, because you'll also notice in the table of contents the encyclopedias aren't there, and that was a very intentional choice. But yeah, there was talk about having some different versions of a table of contents so that you could read it the way it went, or you could read it by character, or you could read it by date.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that.
But then, I think we just sort of set it out the way that it was written.
Okay, yeah, it works either way. It's all about figuring out how you want to guide the reader, or allow the reader to guide themselves, depending on what you want to do.
Yeah, and I did lay these things out to be read in this order, just based on sort of what's revealed and the mood of the piece. But I think it would be really interesting to see if it was read in these different orders and how that might change things for the reader.
I'm definitely on your side. With the fourth season of Arrested Development, I don't need to see it in chronological order. I like the way that it was carefully assembled. Another big issue in the book is definitely class. I found a lot of class struggle in the book. What was your thought about maybe writing about people who aren't often written about, or what was your thought behind making the family a little bit lower socioeconomic class?
I think part of it actually came from the setting itself. So, as I was writing this, I had a few things I was interested in exploring that all kind of came together. And one of them was just this sort of dying southern mill town, very similar to the town where I went to college, which is Burlington, North Carolina. It's based on that town. And so I was really interested in a place that's got, this liberal arts college in the middle of it, and used to be sort of this booming town, but then is either sort of a bedroom community for people who are working in some cities nearby, or then this place where there's a working class that's struggling a little bit, and I was just interested in exploring that kind of town and what it means to be like a quote unquote townie with all these people that are in transition there. And so I think that that's really where it came about. It wasn't driven by what happens in the plot necessarily.
Okay. I have to admit that one of the things that personally isn't my expertise, I suppose. We all have different qualities and positives and things that we think about with fiction. Mm-hmm. I'm not a place guy as much, but what I liked, not that I don't like it, I'm saying it's not my inclination. Mm-hmm. But I did feel a distinct sense of place with Lafayette, mm-hmm. As it is properly pronounced.
Right, Lafayette.
Yeah.
Which came from Vienna, Georgia.
Oh, very cool, very cool.
I think there's an Albany, Georgia too. I actually was someone who place and setting and things like that were never a strength for me. And I think something in moving up to the north made me much more of a southern writer than I had ever considered myself before. So I think that interest in place didn't come till I moved.
So you're saying that becoming a little bit of an outsider, a little bit of a fish out of water, can help you reconnect with a place?
I think so. It made me realize things about where I was from that I'd never seen before, and realize these differences, both the things that I missed and the things that I didn't miss, and just like differences I never would have thought of. So I guess it just made me a way to still have home and this new home at the same time.
Yeah, we have that in central New York, where some people will call a soft drink a soda,
mm-hmm.
which it is, and some will say pop. You say, pop, what are you talking about?
Georgia, they call it Coke.
I know, that's the generic. I've seen those maps, and I find that really interesting. That, bring me a Coke. What kind? Oh, Dr. Pepper.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So do you consider yourself a Southern writer?
I think I do, yeah. I think, this is my first book, but I definitely have works that are very rooted in Southernness and Southern tradition, but I wouldn't say that everything I write is Southern. And definitely the things I'm working on now are actually also more interested in place, but interested in where I am now in Western Mass. But I'll always have that in me because I grew up there, and I went to college in North Carolina. So there's some Southernness that's never going to escape, but I'm definitely accidentally adopting some Massachusetts things as well.
Would any of the accent or?
No, but I do say tag sale now.
Yeah. Central New York has a funny thing with the A's too. Definitely. Well, so what are the benefits and the limitations, do you think, of considering yourself of a region or being considered that way?
I think the benefits are just to be able to really truly represent a culture. I think for me, for the South, maybe this is where some of this need to write Southern places came from, is just the misunderstanding of Southern people. Some things that I got, like when I first moved up here, were like, oh, so you must see a ton of racism, like not here in the North. And, oh, do things move really fast for you here? I'm like, well, I'm from Atlanta, and I moved just as a small town.
It's a pretty big city, yeah. It's a pretty big city.
Yeah, so I think, you can more truly represent the culture you're writing about. But, as I said, I guess, I consider myself a Southern writer, but maybe not that's all that I do. But I don't know. I wouldn't say that it places a limitation on you necessarily.
Okay.
in the same way that someone might place me as a woman writer, but I don't think that gives me any limitation.
I find it's a kind of a contradiction, because labels, they're helpful in terms of, like, your book should go in the fiction section.
Right.
On the other hand, it's a book. It could be considered a family history, maybe self-help. So labels are necessary for classification, but some people value them too much. Some people think they mean too much. So I guess I've resisted that kind of thing, and it's not my focus.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting when you talk to people who aren't writers and they find out you're a writer, because that's sometimes the first thing they ask is like, well, what kind of writing do you do? And it's always like such a hard question to answer, and you realize they mean like, oh, do you write mysteries? Do you write fantasy? But I think with more literary fiction, it's nice because it can be a lot of those things.
Well, I love that you mentioned people who readers. What are you thinking when you sit down? You've got your glass of milk or whatever you are prepared with, and you are working on a story. What are you thinking in terms of audience and what you want to communicate?
For me, I found if I think too hard about audience, that's a problem, because that can change, my instincts as I'm writing. So I try really hard not to think about, who I'm writing for, but that I'm writing. But I guess, when you get into the editing phase and the phase where you're sending things out, for me, I think what's most important is I really want to trust my reader, to be able to figure things out. And I want to, I guess I'm a fairly subtle writer. So I leave a lot up to them to put together based on what I show them. But I guess, as I was writing this, I wasn't necessarily thinking of a particular audience or a particular reader that was going to read this. I just really wanted to make it a book, to finish
that
the
people
book.
will like. That's my thought. I just want people to like my story and enjoy what I'm doing.
Yeah, it's once you finish what you're writing, that all those fears kind of sink in. So I definitely had some fears with this one, because it's a book that's so internal. So there's not a whole lot of action on the page, and so that was something that made me nervous. But the book is what the book is, so I didn't want to change it for those kinds of fears.
Well, I felt that you did a really great job of offering the reader handholds in terms of the narrative. The characters are well drawn, and there's only 4 of them, like the main protagonist. So I thought you did a good job of keeping things chugging along in terms of plot, and also being a little bit I forget the word you used, but subtle.
Thanks.
Very cool. You mentioned you're a writer, so you must love bookstores. You mentioned a few that you really enjoyed. Where do you enjoy getting your books?
I'm really lucky in Western Massachusetts, where I am. There are a ton of bookstores, and I think I was telling you earlier, you forget about it when you go somewhere else and you go into a bookstore and there's like 3 poetry books on the shelf. But I really love Amherst Books, which is in downtown Amherst. It's great. They have a lot of local writers. They've got a great selection. They've got an awesome amount of used books. In East Hampton, where I live, there's a beautiful bookstore named White Square, and they also do art and have workshops and a lot of things there, and it's mostly used books. What else? There's Gray Matter Books and Troubadour Books, which combined in Hadley, and everyone should probably go there at some point. So I'm just, amazed by all the bookstores around me. I'm really, really lucky.
Do you have an example of a book? One of the great things that I love about bookstores is that you stumble upon books you weren't expecting, especially used bookstores. Mm-hmm. Do you have an example of a book that you weren't expecting to pick up or enjoy, and you just fell in love with it?
I gotta think about that.
I know it's a tough question.
I actually fell into Mrs. Bridge that way. I'd heard that Mrs. Bridge was something I needed to read. And actually, I was I think it was in White Square in East Hampton, and they had Mrs. Bridge and Mr. Bridge next to each other, so I figured I'd buy both of them. And just like, those are books I've totally fallen in love with in the last few years. And, now I like want to seek out Evan S. Connell and read like everything he has at this point. But just, so good, so heartbreaking. And I was so glad, I had both of them together because I devoured one and then devoured the next one.
That's what I love about bookstores. You're going to find things that you weren't thinking that you'd fall in love with. You can't, because no algorithm can tell you what you're going to just magically enjoy for a strange reason.
No.
Very cool. We are all curious. We don't usually talk as writers about some of the smaller, more mundane things, but they're always interesting. How do you usually compose your first drafts?
I found more and more that writing on the computer is really hard for me. So if I'm in a really generative state where I'm getting the first things down, a lot of times I'll write by hand. And then in the editing process, it's where I come back and start typing it out. I downloaded Freedom, the app Freedom, which cuts off the internet for however many minutes you tell it to. That's been really, really helpful. But I'm someone that has to get out of the house a lot to write. And so I have like a standing date with some of my friends on Sundays. We go to a coffee shop and we all just like kind of keep each other honest. I found that I think very differently when I'm handwriting than when I'm typing. And so like a good amount of How to Catch a Coyote was written by hand first.
I love knowing that. I'm a fountain pen guy.
Oh.
And I don't know if have you ever used one?
I have really bad handwriting, and fountain pens I think get too runny for me.
Okay, I don't know if you're a lefty. Lefties have some problems. Then there are all kinds of different pens. Some are drier. You can use a drier ink. Well, when I composed with fountain pen, when I started doing that, I found that I was thinking a little more slowly. I was thinking more, and so I don't know. That I think that's one of the benefits. I love that you're composing longhand.
Yeah, it makes you both slow down, but it also I think makes it lower stakes, at least for me, so that I know. If I write one sentence, I just write the next one, and it's they don't feel as permanent, even though in the end it's like less permanent I think on the computer because I can just delete the whole thing if I want to. But there's something more low stakes about it that I think can calm my nerves sometimes when I'm writing, so that helps too.
I love that thought because when you write something down in pencil or ink. You can't just delete it like you can on a computer. So even if you disregard it, it's still there, and you can come back to it, and it's no longer magically gone.
Right.
Very interesting. What does your revision procedure generally look like?
It really depends on what I'm working on, I think. But from the writing by hand, then it's easier for me as I go to the computer. As I type, I'll find myself changing the language, even if I didn't mean to, and I'll oftentimes like the second round of what I write better, and it'll be edited down a little bit more. For me, I find structure is often a hard thing for me, but it really depends on what I'm working on, and so there's a lot of cutting and pasting involved, and like stepping back and looking at the whole thing and rearranging, but a lot of it comes from just that editing and really figuring out, well, what is the voice really here? And I think once I have my voice, then I feel like I can really get it done when I realize how it wants to be narrated.
Yeah, I guess I noticed that from the book. The narrator and the narration are very important to you. Very interesting. What's your general kind of philosophy with respect to submission once you have something that you are prepared to share?
You mean how many places I'll send it to?
Or how many, or how few, or by what method?
I mostly am sending to places, that have online submissions at this point. I've got those few places I send to that, are still, I always get the, we liked it, send us more, and I'm always sending to those first. But I'm someone who likes to send it out, make a note of it, and not think about it for a while. And I know, I have a lot of friends who are constantly checking like their submission list to see what's been opened. But it's much easier for me to send it out and see what comes back from the, 6 places it's at, something like that, and then send it out again if I need to.
Yeah, if they like it, they'll tell you. So relax.
Right. It's much nicer to have a surprise, and it's not as much of a letdown if I haven't been thinking about it and I get a rejection.
Yeah, there's nothing you can do. Once it's gone, there's nothing you can do.
Nope.
Very cool. What is one of your narrative guilty pleasures? Reality TV or some kind of low class magazine? What do you enjoy?
My narrative guilty pleasures. I've never had that question before. I do have a love of Project Runway, especially when I'm cleaning the house. Even though it's become like the exact same episode every single time at this point, I am still watching it, and I will. I just like to watch people make things.
Well, that's an interesting metaphor, definitely. It does tell a story. It is art and poetry in some way. Very cool. Who are it's your opportunity to give some shout-outs. Who are some of your primary mentors in writing?
My mentors?
People you admire. People you admire, whatever, yeah.
In the real world, Chris Batchelder was extremely helpful to me, and so was Noy Holland, Jed Berry, Sabina Murray was also great, and I always return to Flannery O'Connor because she's I wasn't much of a reader as a kid, and I remember reading Everything That Rises Must Converge in a high school class, and suddenly being like, oh, this is writing, this is reading. So I always look to Flannery O'Connor as the first person to show me what's what. Yeah, and as I said recently, Evan S. Connell has been someone I've really been into. And as far as the classics go, I can always read Faulkner and Virginia Woolf again and again.
Very cool. I guess our last question, the most important one, is what should we look for next from you?
Well, coming up, it was just announced on Facebook a little while ago. Outpost 91 is putting out a book of uncommon prayers. I think is going to be the official title, and it's an anthology. It's put together by Matthew Vollmer, and he just collected all these different prayers from whatever religious stance you wanted it to sound like it was from, but that idea of uncommonness. So I have 2 coming out in there on hypochondria and mild paranoia.
Congratulations. Yeah, I hadn't seen that.
Yeah, I'm really excited. There's a lot of really, really great people involved, so it's kind of humbling to be on that list.
Isn't that great? Where when you just end up kind of in an anthology, or I was in a podcast with Richard Blanco, the inaugural poet. Yeah, and I had no idea it was I was so happy. It was so cool.
That's great.
Yeah. Awesome. So we'll definitely look for that. We'll check out what you're up to. We're excited for the next book because this one was so good. It is How to Catch a Coyote from Publishing Genius. You can find links all over the place on my website or in the YouTube box, wherever you're watching this. So thanks again, Christy Crutchfield, for joining me on the show. That is all we have time for today. If you do not have her book, check out the description of the video and find out where you can get her book, How to Catch a Coyote from Publishing Genius. Remember to check out www.greatwriterssteal for hundreds of essays about writing. I am Kenneth Nichols for Great Writers Steal, and remember, Shakespeare did it, so should you.